What is going on, everybody? It's time for another Jote Masterclass on exotics. We're looking at the new, the very hyped, potentially overhyped Tinkerer Exotic Mask. I'm going to get into the game. I'm going to tell you how it works. I'm going to tell you about the trade-offs, DPS opportunities, some combinations that have been working, and how I'm going to be looking to build around it in future setups and give you my final thoughts. So let's get into the game, start talking about it, and then start getting into how we can maximize its potential. Alright, so we're in game now. Let's take a look at the Tinkerer Exotic. Long story short, you can stack weapon talents from a primary and secondary weapon, but there's a lot of caveats that come with that. So you can't use any exotics on your weapons. It can't be a named weapon, whether it has a named talent or if it has a named attribute, like the First Sight or the Lexington, which is very popular. So it has to be a regular high-end weapon, and they both have to be of the same type. So if you meet those requirements, then you'll see when you go into the range here, it's red right now. I have the pistol. Pull out my primary. That symbol down there with the A is going orange. It means it's active. The other thing too is you have to use your primary of the two weapons that you're using. You can see if I swap to my secondary, even though it's also an SMG and it meets all the requirements, it goes red. So you have to use your primary. Both got to be the same type, and it'll stack the second one onto the first one specifically. Now, the other thing that's going on here is there's a lot of trade-offs, so that we talked about prerequisites, but when it comes to trade-offs that you're making, it's pretty costly to run this exotic, and that's why I don't think it's as impactful or as useful as a lot of people might think it is. I think there are very creative ways that we can take advantage of it, but I'll get into that later. Honestly, I just want you to look at your builds. Go through your loadouts and look at all the builds that you have saved that you've been using and how many of them actually already use a high-end weapon in the first place and also don't leverage another exotic gear piece like the Memento in the build where it's clearly an anchor piece of your setup. That's one of the big trade-offs that's happening here, is that this is not going to be changing those kinds of builds. The whole new meta, Tinkerer, this and that, there's some combinations that work really well, but it's not going to be replacing like the Backfire build or any build that uses Memento, because they just do different things than I think what's available to us by just adding another weapon talent on top of it. So when it comes to the gear, obviously, if you choose this as your exotic, you can't run any other exotic gear piece. And that's why I'm saying like builds that use the Memento to its full potential are not going to get replaced by suddenly using Tinkerer and then slapping Preservation onto your primary. It's just not going to do all of what Memento does. So that's part of it. And then the other thing is you can't use a named weapon. You can't use an exotic weapon, and you're now stacking your weapons. And like I said, you can't even really use this secondary. It doesn't activate Tinkerer, so you're only using your primary, and they have to be of the same weapon type, so you're also sharing the same ammo pool. So you're committing to one weapon, and you're not going to have a backup one with extra ammo, which does happen in the type of content that I play in Legendary. Depending on the build, you might want to swap to your secondary of a different weapon type if you run out of ammo, because it's long encounters, tough encounters, especially if you're not running a DPS build and you're hitting for less, you're going to burn through ammo faster. So only having one weapon kind of sucks. That is definitely a downside of it. And especially, most of the builds where I don't swap weapons, it's because I'm using something like Focus or a Chameleon or, Backfire, where it's a special exotic weapon, and then swapping off you'll lose stacks and stuff. Not for high ends. One of the advantages, I think, of running just a regular high-end weapon, or, like a Lexington, like a named weapon, is that, well, you can swap, right? There's no weird special mechanics like the other exotic weapons. So that is something to consider. You're really committing to both talents, but on your primary weapon. And then that's it. So what are we opening up here with the Tinkerer? Well, there's quite a few things that we can do. So my setup originally looked a little bit like this with Coyotes. Now, Coyotes' mask is very powerful in the short range with 25% extra crit damage, but is the most powerful in that long range 25% crit hit chance because you get more bang for buck out of it, and I leverage that in a lot of my DPS builds. You can see how many I have them, right? Now, from my testing, I don't think that the whole point of using Tinkerer is to go straight for damage. I really think it's in utility, and from my testing, it shows the same thing. On the builds where I would normally use and have been using Coyotes, I swapped in Tinkerer, tried some different talents, and it didn't really do that much more damage. So I don't think it's going to be this whole new meta, new ceiling unlocked, or new baseline rather, unlocked across the board, where you're going to be swapping out every single instance of you using a Coyotes mask, which is, I think, the most direct comparison here, especially if we're talking damage, right? So if you see yourself using the Tinker for damage, I unfortunately don't see it usurping the Coyotes mask in every single scenario. And that's kind of the harsh truth, but I do still think there's a lot of ways that we can use the Tinkerer. Now, the reason it comes to like damage, Tinkerer versus Coyotes mask and stuff, a lot of the times when you get into practical instances of what talents would you actually like, it sounds really cool in theory on paper, like, oh, I can double weapon talents, but if you actually look at them, especially for the content that I play, it's really not that crazy. So in terms of weapon talents, the strongest ones, which makes sense, activate on kill. So things like Killer is going to only work after you're getting a kill, and that's how you determine the uptime. Now me, because I only play Legendary, pretty much, I always go away from those talents, unless, you know, I'm playing Legendary solo, but I generally just equip things like Flatline or Strained that have very consistent uptime. Because when you're playing in Legendary, enemies are, first of all, very, very tough, and you're not rolling kills all the time if you're in a group. Even if you're not playing at that level of difficulty, if you're in Heroic and in a group, you might be fighting for kills with other people. So I don't like worrying about that. And then, of course, there's bosses and really tanky enemies where they're taking more than one mag, and so you can't roll Killer over and over again. Sometimes, like boss stage DUA, there are no other adds, so Killer's useless as a talent, right? So when you look at practical instances like what I was testing out here, like, okay, Flatline and then Strained, but Strained doesn't make any sense on the fastest firing SMG. You want to be having longer firing time to take advantage more of Strained. So, okay, let's swap it around, right? And run TA-21, which is perfect for Strained because of how slow it shoots. You get really good use out of Strained. Oh, but now I wanted to stack Flatline for the uptime, and you can't put the linked laser pointer on that TA-21, so this doesn't really work that well. And this is a bit cherry-picked in terms of the instance I'm showing you, but I basically kept running into this same sort of thing, where it wasn't working as well as you would imagine that it would. The talents, in actuality, that we have available to us weren't pairing in such a synergistic way when we're just looking at damage, for example, that it made the Tinkerer super interesting. Now, of course, it's already been out for some time, and other content creators already had builds out on like the second day, probably even the first, and there are some combinations that have been going around that I think do indeed work and are quite powerful, right? So there's the obvious Determined. This is going to bring Determined to a whole other level, because now you can get the headshot everywhere, body shot, one tapping stuff of Determined, which I don't typically play around with. That's not my style, but now you can stack it with a damage talent, so you can do even more damage, plus you're body shotting them all the time. So that's kind of crazy. There's a very anticipated ongoing directive combination, especially with the talent that we got recently, Pressure Point. So if you look at the talents here, right, you can combine Sadist, which is one of the most powerful weapon damage talents, and then you can use it now with something else like Pressure Point, which applies to all enemies under status effect. So you're getting that amplifies by 15 plus the amplifies by 30 to bleeding enemies with Sadist. So stacking that onto an ongoing directive build seems to be quite popular and does work. There's been some combinations with shotguns as well. Let's go look at the talent combinations here, right? Shotguns have some pretty interesting and unique talents like Pummel, where it gives you weapon damage and refills your magazine. Streamline, of course, is very, very strong. That was recently introduced to us. Brazen, really strong as well, really good to keep up. You can do like Pumped Up and Brazen. Pummel and Brazen, really popular. If you're not using skills, stack Streamline on there. Could do quite a bit of damage. So there are ways that we can still push more damage out of the Tinkerer, but here's where I think it has the most potential, and I think a lot of people miss this. I really think that the way to use this to the most potential is by stacking a utility talent with a damage talent, not by doubling down on damage talents and trying to outpace something like Coyote's Mask. And this is where it starts getting creative. It makes the Tinker more unique. It's really actually exemplified by the whole Determined combination. Determined really isn't a damage talent. It's a utility talent. It doesn't do anything extra if you could just hit the head all the time anyway. It's utility, and that's making the whole body headshot, and it's kind of cheesy, and we're not going to get into that. But it's essentially a utility talent that is now being taken to a new level because we can still keep damage by not making that sacrifice and choosing a utility talent over a pure damage talent, right? And that, I think, is the combination that's really interesting. So, obviously, Determined. I think Future Perfect is going to be something that I'm definitely going to be building towards. Hint, hint, for an upcoming build. I'm definitely going to be using that. So something like Preservation could be very useful as well. It's a utility talent that's giving you some more recovery. Repairs 10% of your armor, but headshot kills, it's another 10. So if you really want to stack armor on kill, like a Palisade plus running Prez with the Tinker could be quite strong. I think something like Fast Hands is a damage talent, but a sustained damage talent. Now you can do Strained and Fast Hands. Whereas typically before you have to choose one or the other. Do you want the sustained damage or the burst? You can take both. Combining with Ranger is definitely something I'm going to do. Steady-handed. Combining steady-handed with LMGs plus a damage talent now, right? I really feel like the utility plus the damage is where it's going to be at for the Tinkerer, because from my testing, other than some of the known combinations that I discussed, I really don't think it's outpacing a lot of the builds that I've already put together that use something like Coyotes. And like I had mentioned earlier in the video, it's not going to start replacing things like Memento if you're using other exotic gear in your setups. Alright y'all, so as far as final thoughts go for me, I think the Tinkerer has a lot of potential, but it's more interesting in using it in the unique way of combining utility with damage rather than trying to double stack damage talents on your weapons, because something like Coyotes, from my testing and the builds that I've put together, still outpaces it, especially when it comes to the practicality of what kinds of talents you can actually pair together and get synergy for the content that you're playing. You gotta test out the builds, get off the theory crafting, and bring it into gameplay so that you can actually see what it's like. And for me, the Tinkerer is going to be special for the why not both of utility plus damage. It's an and thing, not an or thing with the Tinkerer. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and it helps you kind of get your thoughts together on how to build around the Tinkerer. And it's been useful for me, and you're going to see some builds with it coming soon for sure. Hit the subscribe button, join the memberships. We got more videos coming, and this has unlocked a whole new level of creativity for me with some challenging combinations that I'm trying to put together here. So you're going to see some builds around that for sure. Super excited. Until the next one, I'll see you. Enjoy.